Welcome back. Okay, we're talking about what the heck would work at this point. And we're not loving those solar radiation management schemes. A couple days ago they sounded like not such a terrible idea, but now we're learning that we have to be really careful about where we reduce the radiation. It's not just enough to say that the total amount of radiation hitting the surface of the Earth was reduced was enough. It had to be reduced in the right pattern, and that was not an easy thing to engineer. It was definitely involving choices about what we wanted the climate to look like. It's not clear we're smart enough to even define those choices, much less make them happen. But you know what? When we talked about geoengineering, we liked those carbon cycle engineering options better because they were closer to actually getting to the root of the problem, which is namely the excessive amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. You know, with that solar radiation management stuff, we weren't actually worried yet about the amount of carbon dioxide. We weren't fixing the core problem. Well, okay, but we talked a little bit about some of the drawbacks of these carbon cycle engineering plans, though, a couple days ago. One of the things is, well, I mean, we like them. We like the fact that they're actually addressing the core problem instead of just hiding the problems behind, you know, a sunshade or behind clouds with a changed albedo. But we also found out that reforestation was not going to get us out of our problem. There's not enough arable ground for plant forests to sequester the carbon that we are burning any given year. Much less year on year and all the way back to the Industrial Revolution. There just isn't enough. Petroleum products are so energy dense, and we use them on such an industrial scale, and have been doing so for such a long time, that the relatively slow process of like a vegetation type feedback of planting trees, letting them pull the carbon out of the atmosphere, can be part of our solution, but can't solve the problem itself. Okay, it's just we can't do this on an industrial scale the way we can on an industrial scale remove millions of years of accumulated petroleum deposits. It just doesn't work that way. All right, we tried. We worked it out though. We tried about it. And we also said, well, you know, in those carbon cycle engineering solutions, we had those air capture methods, which could literally mean as in, like, you know, filtering. It isn't literally a filter, but chemically scrubbing the air, like the picture on the right there. Or it could be like capturing flue gases at a coal-fired power plant or something like that. But it turns out none of these air capture models at the present time have a truly viable business model. At the present time, research in such models, such methods is funded, but no government in the world is willing to pay a company to filter or chemically scrub carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's cheaper to pay the penalties under the Kyoto Protocol. It's cheaper to just be like the United States and not sign the Kyoto Protocol in the first place than to do these plans. They're not going to be economically viable anytime soon. Not in time to save us, okay? They can be part of the story, but they're not going to solve the problem. And in fact, I just captured here a picture that was from the IPCC report, and they actually had examined a number of different schemes, like the ocean fertilization scheme, the stratospheric aerosol scheme, cloud whitening, atmospheric carbon capture, geochemical carbon capture. This is actually just part of a big table where they summarized both its rationale and its efficacy, its affordability, its safety, its rapidity, trying to figure out which of these schemes was best. And I almost had a whole lecture about that. And then I went and looked at other sources and found that they had come up with very different answers as to which ones were most effective and which ones were most affordable and so on. And it didn't seem to me like it was worth your time or mine to sit there and actually give you a lecture about the affordability of stratospheric aerosol schemes or something like that when there's such a wide range in the answers as to how affordable it's going to be. Rather, I think it's educational to understand the range. Basically, what these schemes found is all of these schemes have problems, and there is very large error bars in terms of our understanding of the costs about them, and the certainty that they'll work, and our understanding of the unintended consequences, and so on. Realistically, all of these geoengineering options turn out to be a very big risk. We don't know very well going into them what their costs are going to be, and we don't know very much in advance about their unintended consequences. So what the hell should we do? I mean, man, at this point in a semester, I know if I were a student, I'd be sitting there going, just tell us what to do. Tell us how to solve this problem. Isn't that what this class is about? Of course this is not what this class is about. I wish I had the luxury of telling you what the answers were. I don't know what society should do, and you don't know what society should do. But clearly there is a moral and so on imperative to do something, both at a society level and at the level of individuals. But even at the level of individuals, it's really hard to know what to do. I have an interesting little lecture I do actually do in the 100 level version of this course, where we talk about the fact that even things that just affect me, I have a hard time making decisions about what to do. In that lecture, I'm actually eating at McDonald's, I believe it is, and, trying to figure out, is this meal, should I be eating this? Is it good for, I can't even make a good decision on what to order at McDonald's based on things like what it's going to do to my heart, the greenhouse gas footprint, the carbon footprint of this meal. I can't even do that for me. I can't decide that for the society, and neither can you, and neither can anybody. It's really hard to figure out what the hell we're supposed to be doing at this point. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing anything either. Man, what a mess. I mean, it's a whole lot simpler when you're in grade school. I have a son who's in grade school, and every year near Earth Day, his teacher teaches them, about recycling and stuff like that. All semester they've been taking out the recycling as one of their jobs at the end of the day and so on. And they are told, and do little coloring projects and so on, that every little bit helps. Maybe? I don't know. Let's decide. Does every little bit help? How about recycling? Recycling is one of those few things that you would think almost anybody, depending on where they are in the political spectrum or whatever, would agree is an unambiguous good. And it turns out recycling is complicated. Oh my god, we had to talk about something that's complicated in an environmental science course. It turns out that there was famously an article in the New York Times Magazine, 20 years ago now probably, called Recycling is Garbage, and it led to a book of the same name that talked about the fact that from an economic point of view, recycling barely makes sense. From an economic point of view, much recycling makes no sense at all. But also from an environmental point of view, much recycling makes very little sense. There's good economic sense, for example, to recycling aluminum and other materials that are very pure and take a lot of resources to extract from the natural environment. And aluminum is extraordinarily expensive to get from, bauxite or whatever the mineral, the ore is. Whereas other recycling efforts are almost useless. That there's more carbon involved in the recycling than there is in the recovery of the raw material. But then again, carbon is not the only reason why we recycle. There's a stewardship of resources issue, there's landfill issues, there is total ownership cycle of products issues. I don't think recycling is garbage. We're like the king of recycling. We frequently have to borrow our neighbor's recycling can because ours is too full by the end of the week at our house. I mean, I've got two little kids who hear every day in school that recycling is good. We recycle the heck out of everything. But it's complicated. In the United States, we don't actually recycle that large a fraction of our total waste. But, in some countries, they recycle nearly everything. For example, I used to live in Germany, and in Germany, they strive to have almost 100% of the household waste into recyclables. You get, as part of, when you own a home or whatever, or rent an apartment in the city, you have a small trash can, about the size of like a kitchen trash can, that is where you put your garbage. That is unrecyclable. And it's about the size of, like I said, of a kitchen trash thing, and it's about, I think it's every 2 weeks the trash company comes to pick that thing up. And that's free or very low cost, depending on your city, your municipality, and so on. One kitchen trash can, my kids can fill that in a day if they're been messy or whatever. Well, you can get more than that from the city in Germany, but it gets crazy expensive. To get a size like, what a household garbage on wheels kind of thing that we use to take out the trash on Friday night in our neighborhood, that's hundreds of dollars a month in Germany. But that very much encourages people. The recycling canister is huge and free, and they come like twice a week to empty it so it doesn't smell. Okay, so see how they are incentivizing. All of which makes it sound like Germany is like a happy little recycling utopia. And it's exactly not that either. It's an expensive thing for the city to run. Much of the materials that people just put unrecyclable things into the recycling containers because it's free to put it there instead of once their kitchen trash thing is full. It's a mess. Recycling is a complicated issue. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it. It just means, guess what? Again, it's part of the ownership cycle of materials and stuff like that. It's hard to know what to do. Let's find some damn things that we can agree on that are definitely unambiguous good. How about hanging your clothes on a clothesline? I'm a bit of a fan of hanging the clothes on the clothesline. I'm sure my neighbors love it. I don't hang underwear and stuff like that, but I do hang like jeans and towels and stuff like that on the clothesline. And I think that that's an unambiguous good. I think everybody can agree that it is a good thing to put clothes out on a clothesline rather than running the dryer. I found some statistics. I forget what the original link here was. But like, for example, if you run a load of clothes in the washer, washed on fairly hot water, and then you tumble them dry, it takes 2.4 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. That's just another measure of converted kilowatt hours. Excuse me, the hiccups. Excuse me, converted kilowatt hours to carbon dioxide equivalent. But you can see that, dried on the line, you have about a factor of, about 4 less energy. Electrical dryers just consume huge amounts of electricity. I think that's an unambiguous good, and I think almost anybody would, and you know that almost nobody dries things on the line in the Western world. It's just not the way it's done. In fact, nowadays, manufacturers of clothes don't even anticipate that you are going to dry things on the line. For example, the pigments that are in the clothes are generally not that safe for exposure to ultraviolet radiation. You hang a pair of jeans out on the line and leave them out there in the sun all day, you come back, they are noticeably lighter. Or, jeans are, it's often hard to tell. Towels. If I dry some towels in the washer and the dryer and some on the line, you can tell after a while. The manufacturers aren't even assuming, they don't use pigments that stand being in the radiation like that. Don't even talk to me about the carbon footprint of having to replace the towels that faded. I'm not going there. Should you plan to shorten your commute? Should you plan to live near where you work? I think we can all agree that's a good idea. I think we can all agree that, all else being equal, it's better to live near where you work than to have a big super commute. For years, gosh, I sound like I've had this long life. For years, used to live in West Lafayette, Indiana, but work in Valparaiso, Indiana, which is about 90 miles away. I was actually, 3 days a week I was teaching in West Lafayette, and 2 days a week I was teaching in Valparaiso, so I had to drive back and forth between them. It was 90 miles each way. Oh my word, it ate my soul. There's nothing like 90 miles of rural Indiana to make you wonder why you're doing this. Now, nowadays, I work from home. I don't go anywhere. I drive my kids to school in the morning. Xavier goes about a half mile that way, and Gabriel goes about a mile that way. That's my total driving. Okay? I fill my car up with gas like once every 2 months. On the other hand, my wife still has to drive 18 miles each way to work or something like that. Should we actually be reducing that? Would it have made more sense to come up? Should most people do that? Well, yeah, absolutely. Turns out, actually, private vehicle transportation is one of the largest contributors to your carbon footprint. And you have a potential savings of something like 30% on average of your carbon footprint if you just made better plans. Well, I don't want to live near where I work because the schools in that area are terrible. The housing options in that area are terrible. There's no shopping in that area. It's not a fashion. I know. I understand. That is a complicated thing about life in a modern world, is that not every neighborhood is ideal for every couple. It's not ideal for every person's lifestyle. It's not ideal. That's just clearly should be a factor, though, in when you're deciding. Living closer to where you drive each day makes sense. How about the landfill in general? Should we put less stuff into the landfill? We didn't talk much about landfills in this class because, well, frankly, that's another whole complication. Once you start talking about landfills, you start talking about heavy metals that leach into soils, and you start talking about methane production. It gets complicated fast. But there is true that there is a greenhouse gas footprint associated with putting stuff into the landfill. Again, it's part of the story of the total ownership cycle of products, where there are costs associated with getting the trash from your house to the landfill, to producing the landfill, to maintaining the landfill, to greenhouse gases that come off of the landfill in the form of methane and so on as materials that are in the landfill decompose. And in fact, this is a potentially large-ish contribution to our total greenhouse gas footprint. I happen to find on treehugger.com or some such thing. Waste reduction and recycling could cut carbon dioxide emissions by 345 million tons a year, which certainly sounds like a lot, and is nothing to sneeze at if that was true. I'm not sure. I think this is the world's greatest source of information, and I didn't read it with a keen enough eye to have noticed what all assumptions they were making here. But 345 million tons caught my eye. Total anthropogenic emissions of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are in the order of 9 gigatons. So we are a factor of, so that's only like 1/30th of our total emissions. Don't get me wrong, that's not nothing, but I'm not sure that's the place I would start with my carbon emissions, worried about carbon emissions and so on, versus, say, my transportation, right? What else should we be doing? Should we be setting the thermostat at a better temperature? Oh, absolutely. Now, this is something that everybody can do. We can adjust the thermostat. I pulled up from some website, I forget, EPA I think is where I got this. If you set your thermostat up 2 degrees in the summer, let it be 2 degrees warmer in your house in the summer, and down 2 degrees, let it be 2 degrees colder in the winter in your house, you could save up to a ton of carbon dioxide per year. Well, there's obviously a lot of assumptions in there about what the climate you live in, or how well insulated your house is, and so on. All of which, your mileage will vary, no pun intended. But 2,000 pounds of carbon, that's a ton. But again, when we're talking on the order of gigatons of carbon total emissions from anthropogenic sources, 1 ton from your house doesn't seem huge. But on the other hand, it's also not nothing. I mean, I think this is worth doing. Okay? I think we can unambiguously say this is something everybody can and should be doing. Okay, great. Hooray, we have something to agree on. Should you turn off the lights when you're not in the room? Everybody except my 2 children seem to think that's a good idea. I would say, yes, go turn off the lights in a room, but let's not kid ourselves here. Turning off unneeded lights could remove it works out to about 375 pounds of carbon per year. Again, when we're talking gigatons, this is obviously a very, very small amount. On the other hand, there is a spirit of stewardship of resources and so on. It's a good thing. It's a silly waste to leave the light on. I'm sure if I walked around my house right now, I'd find lights that my kids had left on. Okay? Alright, so let's do that. How about combining trips with your car? I mean, we're Americans. We like to get in the car for every damn thing, right? Let's drive out to Walmart and look at this, and then we're going to come back to the house, and then later today we'll drive out to near Walmart to go look at that, and then we're going to drive back. Should we just be combining those trips? Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, having a plan as to how you're going to use your car when your car is one of the most wasteful things that you own is obviously a good plan. And when you're using the car, should you be using like cruise control, and should you be properly inflating the tires and so on so you get better gas mileage? Absolutely. I have some kind of little, software or something on my car that keeps track of the mileage I'm getting, and I love to kind of game it. To see if I can set the cruise control when I'm off to run my kids to a doctor's office or something. If I use the cruise control going there, but then don't use it coming back, it's interesting to compare the mileage. And I'm sure I've saved, a few ounces of gas or something like that by using the cruise control. But integrated over time, it makes good sense. Same with like properly inflating your tires and so on. I mean, they certainly do improve your gas mileage on the order of a few %. It's worth your time. That is something you should do. Hooray! Something we can agree on. There's no environmental downside to properly inflating your tires. Great. Excuse me. Should you fly less often? Oh, now you're getting to something hurtful. Dr. Shragi, did you mention flying? But we're affluent Western people, and we like to go places, and we like to watch for when there's airfares that are good prices, and we like to go. And in the 105 version of the class, they actually compute things like the carbon footprint of things like, going someplace for spring break or whatever, and they're shocked by it. One trip on an airline the amount of carbon involved in that flight is far more than they saved by, taking the bus to school this year rather than not that any Creighton student ever takes the bus to school, but you know what I'm saying. They should, but I don't think very many do. They're shocked. Because it turns out air transportation is pretty much our worst offender in terms of how much it costs to move a unit mass of material, a unit of distance. Like, a pound of material, I know pound is mass, but you know what I'm saying. To move like a kilogram of material a kilometer. You really can't do worse than air travel. So like this diagram here shows for each of the different forms of transportation, air, maritime, rail, and road, it shows how much, what is the reasonable range of the amount of carbon it takes. It's actually grams of carbon per ton per kilogram, which is about the world's worst units, but anyway. I want you to notice that air is by far the biggest number, and notice that the scale is exponential here. It's a factor of 10 to 100 bigger than the other things. It's huge. Air is a terrible way to travel in terms of the carbon footprint. But Dr. Sharkey, the plane was going to be flying down to Cabo Wabo anyway. What does it make a difference if I'm on it? Well, the plane does actually use more fuel if you're on it. But more importantly, versus the seat is empty or whatever. But more importantly, by you being on there, you are providing an economic incentive integrated across all the other people who wanted to buy tickets for the airlines to create more routes, to create more flights, etc. It is a problem to take more flights. People don't want to cut the number of flights they take. Too bad, you need to. Says the guy who has, Lord, I'm a big traveler. I go everywhere. Should you be doing all these things? Of course you should. These are all intrinsically good things from a climate perspective. They are all reducing our carbon emissions. They're all making things better. All of these things are postponing the day when we have to get our carbon emissions to zero. Remember, for all intents and purposes, we're going to have at some point some climate target. Okay? And that means that we hit a point in the future where there's a certain amount of carbon we can have emitted and no more. The only way the climate stabilizes is if we have to stop emitting carbon. But this at least postpones that day. It gives us time to have better solutions in place. All of these things that we're talking about, drying clothes on the line, setting your thermostat, living closer to where you work, flying less often, etc. All of these things have the potential to reduce the final temperature at which the climate does eventually equilibrate. Individually, it's not going to be all that much, obviously. I mean, obviously, one load of laundry makes really no difference. One trip on your airline ticket makes no difference. But integrated over society, it makes a huge difference. Well, it has the potential to make a measurable difference, let's put it that way. All of these things have reasons why we would do them other than just carbon cycle stuff. All of this stuff has issues of stewardship, about providing and taking care of resources for the future and so on. And all of these things, and this is not the class to learn about stewardship, okay? You have better places in your education to learn about, the ministry of stewardship and the philosophy of stewardship and so on. All of these things will make our world better for our descendants. Our society is adapted for the way the climate is now, and so any changes from the current climate just makes us less well adapted, okay? We like the climate now. It's not even clear anymore that we would like the climate of the past, pre-industrial and so on. Realistically, we're set up for the climate now. Any way in which the climate changes is just another way in which we are poorly adapted to the world in which we live in. Oh, so in other words, Dr. Shruggy, you're telling me I have to do everything. Yes! All those little things that are difficult and hurt and they're decisions none of us want to make, we all have to be doing them. There are powerful reasons why we need to be doing them. You can go into a theology class and learn about how the Pope wrote in Laudato Si, his papal encyclical of 2015, about care for our common home, and how there are spiritual and theological reasons why we need to be doing this. Or you can go into a environmental economics class and learn about it from a dollars and cents point of view, or you can go to an environmental toxicology class and learn about all the horrible things and how in a social justice class those things percolate down to poor people and affect them disproportionately compared to rich people. We get to the same answer so many different ways. Damn it, as much as it hurts, we have to do all these things, but guess what? All these little things are kind of too late. we are getting to make small adjustments to how we are going to reach a new higher equilibrium temperature, but we don't get to prevent that anymore. We don't get to decide that we're not going to have global warming or something like that. That's too late. There is no point in trying to fool ourselves about any of these solutions. We are not going to recycle our way to a better future. Okay? It isn't like sorting your plastics and your metal cans is going to make a difference. We don't actually, most of it's single stream nowadays, we don't do that, but you know more about that than I do in many ways. The point is, that has to be part of the solution. We need to manage what we're getting into landfills. We need to manage how we work with materials so that we are spending less energy extracting raw materials from the environment. But we're past the point now where that's going to solve the problem. We are no longer going to be able to reforest our way out of these problems, okay? In the 1800s, maybe that would have been possible when we were only dealing with the carbon that came from coal-fired power plants at factories and steam locomotives and stuff like that, but we're way past that. The ship has sailed, okay? We are no longer going to be able to just plant trees and get our way back out of this. That does not mean that planting trees is a bad idea. It is part of the solution. It is part of managing the temperature at which we reach our equilibrium. It's part of prolonging the amount of time we have before we have to reach zero emissions, but we can't solve our problems with reforestation anymore. Okay, we waited too long. Nor are any of the other Happy Earth Day solutions going to work. I don't know. Solar, wind, hydroelectric, whatever your favorite thing is. Individually, it's too late. We can't, those solutions are not going to work individually. They're only small parts of a large mix of solutions, which really shouldn't surprise us. Because here's the deal. We built this. We built a huge world with complicated, astonishing, amazing... Again, I just recently finished reading the Pope Francis's Laudato Si, or however you pronounce it, the encyclical on the environment. And it is an intrinsic good that we've built this, okay? We are fighting disease, and we have good hygiene, and fewer people are hungry, and we have better communications, and we have better access to information, and better access to medicines, and everything. It is not a bad thing that we've built this world. That is not the issue. But maybe the answer it comes from how we did that. I mean, we built this, and we're able to do so because of certain factors that maybe we have to think about in the future, though. I mean, for example, to build the world that we see around us, we spent a very large amount of money integrated over a very long period of time. The modern, industrialized, westernized, globalized world didn't just happen. It didn't spring forward in one construction project. It's a very long process of small steps, the product of trillions of economic decisions, environmental decisions, personal decisions. Things get built, things got torn down. New things got built, they failed. New things got built, we did it again. Each time building bigger, building different, putting things different ways. Finding what worked, what built on, what was able to build what, where did we put schools, where did we put neighborhoods, city burns down, we do something different, we build a new airport, we outgrow the airport, we build a different airport. It is this integration of trillions of decisions, trillions of dollars, over the last 150 years that has got us where we are. Maybe thinking that a plastic recycling tub is going to solve our problems was kind of foolish. We probably need to be thinking in terms of very large numbers of decisions involving large amounts of dollars over a very long period of time to fix our problems. We did this, why can't we do that? Now part of the story too, was we were able to build what we did because we had cheap and energy-dense fuels. When we started building railroads, coal resources were just ludicrously easy to get. Coal was an obvious thing to use to make steam power to run a locomotive. Because coal hadn't been extensively exploited in the past, all of the resources of coal were near the surface, very easy, relatively easy to exploit by I don't mean to say that the lives of the coal miners was easy, but like using 1820s technology like pickaxes and so on, they were able to get to the coal. Okay? That's in contrast to today where we have much more expensive, difficult resource to get to deep and narrow coal seams. You know, it's a whole different story. Oil, petroleum, used to literally bubble up in some places on Earth. Okay? We didn't have to do anything to get to small quantities of petroleum. When we started needing to extract petroleum on an industrial scale, early wells were not very deep, they weren't very well located, and we still got enough petroleum to grow the entire Detroit auto industry. Now we have to have expensive tar sands and shale fracking and things like that. We got where we are because the energy was cheap. Okay? That's something we're going to have to think about in the future. Clearly, managing the cost and the cost of energy is going to have to be part of the problem, a part of the solution. We can't just turn our backs on sources of energy that there is enormous infrastructure already in place, but we also have to recognize that those sources of energy are getting more and more complicated to get to and are presumably going to get more and more expensive. We need to be building green sources and renewable and carbon-free sources of energy into the mix so that energy prices don't spiral upward. Spiral upward, is that the right way? Don't spike. Okay? It's something we can learn by looking at the past. And also, though, we were able to build what we did here in part because we weren't worried. It didn't even occur to us to be worried about the climate when we were building the industrialized world. Maybe there's a lesson here. Maybe when we're planning for how to deal with climate change, we need to think better than we did then. Not just think about climate. I mean, that's kind of obvious. We've had 40 lectures or whatever now in this class that's about thinking about climate. A better question is, what else should we be thinking about? Because if we are going to be building some kind of different, smart energy grid and clean sources of energy and green, carbon-free and all this kind of stuff, there's things we aren't even thinking of yet. Okay? 50 years from now, somebody's going to be saying, why when they built that smart energy grid didn't they think about blank? Or why when they subsidized the big growth of these wind power plants, why didn't they think about blank? Good point. Let's think about that now. When we built this stuff, we didn't think very far ahead. Let's try to be smarter about that this time around. See, this all sounds like we kind of know now what we got to do in the future. We just don't like the answer. Sounds like a long period of time with a lot of money and a lot of thinking before we do it. Oh, I can only imagine how disheartened students get to when they feel like that. They really wanted an answer. They wanted an answer. We're going to do this and everything's going to be fine. It's not the way these kind of problems get solved. We didn't build the modern world with one quick answer, and we're not going to fix the modern world with one quick answer. All right. Well, okay. After this, we have one more lecture that is actually mostly review. Because the final is at least partially, what's the right word? Cumulative. But the final is at least partially cumulative. So we have to have a little bit of material, and then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how that cumulative final works. So let's answer two quick questions before we are done with this lecture. Question 3. Which of the following modes of transportation produces the greatest amount of carbon emissions to move a pound of cargo 1 mile? Aviation, railroad, long-haul trucking, or passenger cars? None of them are great, but which one's the worst? Make a choice from those 4 options and get a little feedback before we move on to the final question.